The butcher vanished without a trace. 10 women gone, no bodies, no trail, only fear left behind. Into that silence rides Cain, a tormented gunslinger with nothing left to lose, and Sela, a hardened scout whose sister was among the taken. Their uneasy alliance crackles with buried pain and unspoken truths. As they track a killer who always seems just out of reach, every step drags them deeper into a wilderness where trust is fragile, the past cuts deep, and the butcher isn't just hunting, he's waiting. Settle in, friend. Pour yourself something warm. We're going back to a time when justice rode on horseback and the line between right and wrong was drawn in blood. It's 1879. Dust clings to the air in a dying frontier town called Whitlock Ridge, just a whisper off the Colorado border. And one bitter autumn evening, as the sun dipped behind the buttes, 10 women vanished without a trace. What followed wasn't just a manhunt. It was a reckoning, led by one rider chasing justice, and the ghost of his past. The wind dragged dust across the empty plains, like fingers scraping at old wounds. Beneath a jaundiced sun, heat shimmered off blackened ruins, the bones of what had once been a settlement called Hollow Bend. Only the brittle creak of a half-burned sign remained, swinging from a twisted post, "Peace to all who dwell." No peace remained. Bootprints marked the dirt, leading away from shattered doors and bloodied thresholds. Children's toys lay discarded. A doll's face cracked in two. The air still smelled of gunpowder and something worse, burned flesh, the iron tang of spilled blood, and smoke that clung like guilt. From the southern ridge, a lone rider emerged. He wore no badge, no banner, just dust-caked leather and a face carved from grief. His horse, lean and scarred, moved with the wariness of a creature long in unfamiliar territory. Together they crossed into the ruins, hoofbeats muffled by ash. The rider dismounted, silent. He moved with precision, the stiffness of old wounds evident in each step. A revolver hung at his hip, worn smooth from use, and a rifle was slung over his back. He knelt near the remains of what had once been a stable. Drag marks, blood pooled, then faded. A trail. He touched it with 2 fingers, still wet. Jedediah Cain had found his beginning. He rose and turned toward the wreckage. A man's body lay curled beside a water trough, his face frozen in terror. Cain pulled a scarf from around his neck, wiped dust from the man's badge. Hollow Bend Sheriff. Cain said nothing. He simply covered the man's eyes with his hat, then moved on. Inside what remained of the saloon, tables were overturned, cards scattered, stained with red. He stepped past them to the back, where the air was thick with death. There, carved into the wall with something cruel and serrated, was a single word. Next. Cain stared at it. He didn't need to guess what it meant. He had seen the same word, carved into tree bark, burned into barn doors, etched in blood, across 5 towns now. Each time, 10 women vanished. No note, no ransom, no tracks. Only the word. They called the monster behind it the Butcher. No one knew his real name, just that he came like plague, unseen, unheard. But when he passed, families were torn apart and hope rotted in place. Cain turned from the wall and lit a match with the edge of his thumb. He dropped it into a bottle of rye. It shattered in flame as he walked out of the saloon and let it burn behind him. Hollow Bend would bury itself. He mounted his horse and rode west. Cain hadn't always been a man who chased ghosts. Once before the war, he had been a father, a husband. He used to wake to warm hands and soft laughter, his daughter's curls bouncing in the light of morning. Then the war took him, and while he was gone, others came, raiders, deserters, men without flags who wanted only blood and fire. They left behind ashes. No ransom then either. Just bones and whispers. For months he searched, through rivers and ravines, across lines drawn in blood by generals and drunkards. The trail grew cold, but the fire never did. Years later, a girl went missing from Red Pines, then 3 from Halliwood, then 6 from Fort Ives, always 10, always women, always places where people believed no one could hurt them. He'd seen the scars the butcher left behind. Families destroyed. Children hiding beneath floorboards, too afraid to speak. Some called the monster a myth, a curse, or punishment from the Lord. But Cain didn't believe in curses. Only men, evil ones. A day's ride west brought him to Burnt Cross, a small settlement nestled near the edge of a canyon. It was the last place one of the taken women had been seen. Word traveled slow out here, carried more by horses than telegrams. He tied his horse outside the general store and walked into the saloon with his hat low. The room went quiet. Cain didn't look like most men who rode into town. He didn't boast, didn't drink. His eyes were sharp and cold, like rifle barrels left in the snow. He carried himself like a man with nowhere to go but straight ahead. The barkeep didn't ask questions. He just poured a glass of water and slid it across the bar. Cain drank, then placed a small silver coin on the wood. Woman went missing here 3 nights ago. Clara May Linton, 18, blonde, favors her left hand. The barkeep hesitated, then nodded toward a man near the fire, older, with dirt under his nails and a rifle leaning against his chair. Her father, the barkeep whispered. Cain approached. The man didn't rise, just looked at him with eyes hollowed by grief. You the law? No. Then what the hell are you? Cain sat. A man who follows devils. The father's hands trembled. Clara was supposed to marry come spring. She sang in the chapel, had a laugh that made folk forget the war. Now she's gone. No tracks, no scream, nothing. Cain looked into the fire. He leaves no noise, but he leaves signs. The father's voice cracked. What kind of signs? Cain pulled a slip of paper from his coat. On it, a charcoal sketch, one of the markings carved into a tree in Hollow Bend. The man flinched. I saw that on the edge of town, he whispered. 2 nights before she vanished. Thought it was just some boys. Cain stood. It wasn't. He left without another word. Just outside of town, where the land turned rugged, Cain found the tree. The mark was fresh, still glistening. Below it, bare footprints, small, delicate, leading north. He followed. Dusk came quick in the canyons. Shadows stretched like clawed fingers. Cain moved with practiced silence, watching the rocks, the sky, the signs. He found the camp an hour before midnight. Not the butcher's, but someone else's. A scout, maybe. A man sleeping with a rifle across his chest. Cain approached slow, quiet, until the man moved. Steel flashed. Cain ducked. The knife grazed his coat as he swept the attacker's legs, pinned him with a knee, and drew his revolver. Why follow me? Cain growled. The man spat blood. You're hunting the butcher. Cain's eyes narrowed. And? I aim to kill him first. Cain lowered the hammer, took a step back. The man pushed himself up, slender, young, with the look of a farmhand turned gunman. His eyes burned. My sister, he said. One of the first. Fort Ives. Cain nodded once. Then you ride with me. Keep quiet. Keep fast. And don't get in my way. They rode north by starlight. The trail grew colder with each mile, but Cain knew the butcher wasn't far. The markings grew more erratic, deeper, angrier. Something had changed in him. He was slipping. That night, Cain took first watch. He stared into the fire, the young man already asleep beside it. He remembered another night, years ago, his daughter curled in his arms, singing a lullaby as the fire cracked. Her voice had been soft, sweet. Now it haunted him. He touched the locket around his neck. Inside, a drawing she'd made, a family, smiling. The next morning they found the first body, hung from a tree like meat. The woman's eyes were gone, her hands broken, a ribbon tied around her neck like a child's bow. Cain didn't flinch. He just buried her. The boy threw up behind a bush. Cain waited until he returned. Still want to follow? The boy wiped his mouth, nodded. Then don't look away again. 3 more days passed. They encountered a trader who'd seen a strange man pass by 2 nights before, tall, ragged, dragging something behind a horse. Didn't speak, didn't look. "Eyes like an animal," the trader whispered. Cain asked which way he went. "Northwest, into the pines." That night, Cain dreamed of the house again, the fire, his wife's voice calling his name, cut off too soon, his daughter's room empty. He woke with a start. The fire was out. The boy was gone. Panic rose in Cain's chest like bile. Then a cry, sharp, distant. Cain grabbed his rifle and ran, through brush, through briars, through fog. He found them in a clearing. The boy on his back, bleeding from the leg, and before him, a man, cloaked in black, hair long and wild, a blade in each hand. The butcher. Their eyes met. Time froze. Then the man turned and vanished into the trees. Cain fired, missed. He dropped to the boy's side. "You all right?" The boy nodded, pale. Cain stared into the dark where the monster had gone. Now he knew the face. Now he had the scent. And now it was war. He carried the boy back, dressed the wound, said nothing. The boy looked up. Was that him? Cain nodded. "Why didn't you kill him?" Cain stared at the moon. "Because he wants me to try." They rode again in silence, past dawn and into a storm. Cain's coat soaked. His wounds screamed. But he kept riding, because vengeance doesn't wait. And the butcher had made his next move. The trail was fresh now, and Cain knew. The reckoning had begun. Cain pressed forward into the canyons, the wind growing colder as he rode under skeletal pines. The forest swallowed the trail, but signs remained. Broken twigs, faint footprints aside hoof marks, and indentations in the moss where something heavy had passed. His jaw set, he pushed deeper, aware that every step took him nearer to a monster, and farther from the world he once knew. Night's first whisper carried the scent of wood smoke. Cain followed it to a clearing where a single campfire glowed. A man hunched nearby, sharpening a blade by lantern light. Cain dismounted without hesitation, forcing his horse to kneel and feed, then approached, revolver drawn. The man flinched, eyes tracing the rifle slung on Cain's back. "Ain't here for talk," Cain said softly. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. He was tall, sinewy, scarred across his cheek, his face maps of survival. He slid the knife into his belt, then stood, and Cain sabis, or the bow on his back and the knife at his boot. A hunter, a survivor, a ghost of the plains. "Name's Sella," the man finally said, voice low. "I track those who leave blood signs." Cain's pulse quickened. The markings on trees, the blood, the missing women, they weren't just random horror, they were deliberate. A trail, a signature, a declaration of intent. "What do you know of the butcher?" Cain asked, glancing at Sella. Sella folded arms. "He is not of tribe, not even of man, takes women, leaves ruin. I've followed him enough to know his path, north into the storm grounds." Cain nodded. The storm grounds, a stretch of cliffs and narrow ravines where weather turned savage without warning. Few dared cross them, fewer still survived. Cain sat by the fire. "I lost someone once," he said quietly, pulling out a small tarnished locket. "A daughter, taken by savages when I fought to save her. Never found her. I'm here to make sure no one else loses someone." Sella studied the locket without comment, then he offered a canteen. Cain drank. In that moment the two men reached an uneasy truce. They both carried grief and a wounded purpose. Cain's eyes bore the hollow ache of a man haunted. Sella's gaze remained unreadable, but he accepted the unspoken alliance. Before dawn, they left the fire and resumed the chase. Light leaked through the pines, fog lingering in low pockets. They passed trenches carved by wind and rain, crosshatches of old battles etched on the cliff walls. Somewhere ahead lay the lair of the man who had stolen 10 futures. Late afternoon, a sudden windstorm flared, flinging dust into their eyes and rattling loose stones above. Sela guided Kane down a narrow ravine where the wind's force stalled. Branches whipped overhead. The two pressed on, crouching together for balance, their silhouettes hunched against the gale. A low growl echoed from the shadows. Two wolves emerged between rocks, eyes glowing. Kane froze. Sela raised his bow and with a single arrow felled one. The other lunged, and Kane shot through the neck. The beasts collapsed, dragging themselves across the shattered rocks. Silence returned, leaving only the hiss of the storm. Kane exhaled, blood pounding in his ears. Sela murmured, "Nature tests the resolute." Kane nodded, wiping sweat and blood from his brow. He realized the wild didn't yield to sorrow. It demanded strength. They pressed north, exhausted but determined. Sela spoke quietly between steps. "He uses the storm for cover. Thinks no one follows in a tempest." Kane considered that. "I'm here." He touched the butt of his revolver. He threatened to vanish. "I'm following, through storm or stone." They found the remains of a broken shack near a ravine's edge. Inside, debris and clawed wood, signs of a struggle. No bodies, but a ribbon of cloth snagged on a nail. Clara May's ribbon, bright red. Kane examined it carefully. She was here. Sela nodded, marking the spot in the dirt. They prepared camp, knowing they were close. Night fell, wind still howling beyond. Kane sat opposite Sela, staring at the fire's fickle glow. "You think you'll find what you lost?" Sela asked after long silence. Kane looked at the flickering embers. "Doesn't matter. I have to try." Dawn would come with questions, but tonight grief and resolve burned equal. They rose, packed silently, and walked into the darkness deeper than before, toward the butcher's echo, knowing that every man they crossed, every storm they braved, brought them closer to a reckoning. The storm broke just after twilight, tearing through the canyon like a scream from the earth itself. Trees groaned, branches cracked, rain poured in waves that felt like fists. Kane and Sela took cover beneath an overhang of stone, the fire they'd built already drowned in mud and ash. Neither man spoke. They were too close now, too near the place where every whisper, every track, every blood-marked tree had pointed. It wasn't just a hunch, it was certainty, a primal pull in Kane's gut, in the cold that crawled up his spine. The butcher was here, somewhere in the dark, waiting or watching, or hunting them. Sela sat still, staring through the sheets of rain. "He is not sleeping," he said. "Not now. He feels it too." Kane adjusted the rifle in his lap. "Good. Let him feel something before I end him." Sela didn't reply. Instead, he unwrapped a worn cloth from his satchel, revealing an amulet, bone carved with tribal markings. "My sister wore this before she was taken. I found it by the river. She was 12. Kane looked at the amulet for a long moment, then back at Sela. "Why didn't you stop?" "I couldn't." His voice didn't waver. She needed someone who would not forget. Kane understood, not because of the words, but because of the silence that followed them. When the storm thinned to a heavy mist, they moved again, slowly, carefully, through dripping rocks and tangled brambles, deeper into the canyon. Kane's boots sank in mud. His coat clung to him like a second skin. Every sound echoed, and every shadow twisted. They found the first sign an hour before midnight, a rotted pine felled deliberately across the trail, its bark marked with another carving. A hand, a small one. Below it, 10 vertical scratches. Kane touched the symbol and felt his teeth grind. Sela pointed toward a narrow pass in the cliff wall, barely wide enough for a man to slip through. He went this way. Kane nodded, already ducking into the crack. The passage swallowed them, the walls wet and close. They moved single file, rifles in hand. The air grew colder. It smelled of mold, old iron, and something beneath it, faint and putrid, like decay soaked into stone. The passage opened into a hollowed-out gorge, and Kane stopped. Tense, ragged, makeshift, built from hides and burlap. 10 of them. Zeller stepped forward, gaze sharp. A camp. Kane's heart hammered. He checked the nearest tent. Empty. Torn fabric, shredded rope, chains on the ground. The second, also empty but stained. Blood. Smears of it on the inside. Drag marks, scratches on the floor. Each tent told the same story. A holding pen. A prison. The last one was different. It had a lantern burning inside, flickering, feeble but lit. Kane raised his rifle, stepped forward. A sound. A soft sob. He rushed in. Clara May Linton sat bound in the corner, face pale, eyes hollow, but alive. She flinched as Kane knelt. "Clara," he said, voice steady, "I'm here to take you home." Her lips trembled. "He's still here. He said he'd come back." Zeller appeared at the entrance, watching the perimeter. Kane cut her bonds, gently helping her to her feet. She collapsed into his arms. Her skin was ice. Her breath came in shallow gulps. Kane stood, shielding her. "Zeller, we have to move." The first shot rang out. Wood exploded beside them. Clara screamed. Kane shoved her down and dove beside her, rifle raised. From the shadows across the gorge, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked, blood on his hands, face hidden by grime and a long beard. But his eyes, empty, bottomless, deranged. Kane didn't wait. He fired. The butcher vanished behind a tree. Zeller moved like a ghost, already flanking. Another shot whistled past Kane's shoulder. Clara clutched her head, sobbing. Kane pulled her behind the tent and reloaded, mind racing. He'd been waiting, watching, luring them in. Zeller's voice shouted from the far side, "He's circling!" Kane took a breath, set Clara down. "Stay low." Then he ran. Through tents, through mud, over bone and cloth, the gorge echoed with movement, footsteps that weren't his, voices that didn't belong. He caught sight of the butcher again, scrambling up a rock face, rifle slung, knife drawn. Kane fired. Missed. The butcher disappeared again. He's faster than he looks. Kane pressed on, breath ragged. The darkness closed around him. Through, and air rumbled above. Then he slipped, stepped into a shallow pit, twisted his ankle, cursed as pain flared. He scrambled out just in time to avoid another shot. He ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding. Blood from his temple trickled into his eye. Across from him, the butcher stood. No more hiding. The two stared at each other, 20 feet of open ground between them. The storm held its breath. "You took 10 women," Kane growled. "You left nothing but bones." The butcher smiled. "I took more than that. I took futures." His voice was rasping, thick with rot. His smile was wrong, too wide, too eager. Kane raised his rifle. "I buried my family because of men like you." "You're too late," the butcher said. "There's more, always more. You can't stop it." "I don't have to stop it everywhere," Kane said. "Just here." He pulled the trigger. The shot caught the butcher in the shoulder. He staggered, screamed. Kane rose, advanced. The butcher threw his knife. Kane dodged, tackled him, and the two men fell into the mud. Grappling, fists flying, pain erupting like sparks. The butcher clawed, bit, roared. Kane struck, again and again. Years of grief, rage, guilt, it all poured into his fists. Until finally, the butcher stopped moving. Kane stood, breath ragged, fists bleeding. It was over. But as he turned, another voice, a groan. He spun around, rifle up. A second figure emerged from the dark. Kane froze. It was a woman, one of the missing, alive. She was gaunt, her clothes hung in tatters, eyes sunk deep into her skull, but she was breathing. Kane lowered his rifle slowly. You're alive." She didn't speak. Her lips trembled as if the words had long since turned to dust inside her. Then from behind her, another shadow shifted. A second woman appeared, then a third. From the cracks in the gorge wall, from beneath overturned crates, from the Vsogol's airy earth, they emerged one by one. 7 in total. Clara among them made 8. The 9th and 10th were never found. Kane could see it in Sellers' expression when he returned, eyes scanning each face and finding only ghosts. The storm had passed. The gorge lay still, shrouded in fog, the butcher's body twisted where it had fallen. The wind no longer howled, it whispered, as if the land itself exhaled. Kane stood among the women, eyes hollow. He'd chased vengeance for so long he hadn't truly believed there'd be survivors. Now they surrounded him, not cheering or thanking him, but breathing, silent, shell-shocked. Seller moved among them, offering water, a blanket, his hands gentle, his face unreadable. Then he returned to Kane's side, watching the body on the rocks. "His name?" Seller asked. Kane shook his head, never cared to learn it. Seller nodded slowly. Names don't matter to the dead. They buried the butcher under a pile of stone, not for honor, for closure, for certainty. Kane drove the final rock in place with his boot, then stood over it, wind brushing his coat. Seller remained still. "It does not end with his death. I know. There will be others. There always are." Kane turned to the women, some sitting, others pacing, none speaking. The fire had been rebuilt, and food rationed. Kane saw the youngest girl, barely 13, staring at the flames. She looked just like his daughter might have. His chest tightened. The past returned in flashes. His wife's screams, the fire, the stolen horses, the empty cradle. And then Clara approached him. "You don't look like a hero," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "I'm not." She hesitated, then took his hand. "But you came." Kane didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. That night, as the fire crackled and the women slept huddled in borrowed blankets, Kane stood watch beside Seller. The stars burned above, sharp and cold. Coyotes howled in the distance, and somewhere a hawk cried. Kane broke the silence. "You think they'll heal?" Seller considered. "Some wounds never close, but they will walk. They will breathe. That is enough. For now." Kane nodded. "You have done what you came for," Seller added. "No." Kane looked out across the gorge. "I came to end something, but I found something else instead." "What?" He looked at the survivors. "The beginning of something better." Seller said nothing for a long time. Then he placed the amulet into Kane's hand. "Take it. You've carried this hunt with your blood. Let the spirit go." Kane closed his fingers around the carved bone. He felt its weight, not heavy, but meaningful. At dawn, they prepared to leave. The journey back through the pass was slow. The women were weak, and the rains had turned trails to rivers. Seller led the group through the high ridges, Kane following behind, rifle ready, every sense alert. His limp had worsened, the ankle swollen, but he bore it without complaint. 3 days passed before they reached the edge of the nearest settlement, a remote outpost manned by trappers and silent-eyed widows. When the townsfolk saw the women approaching, hollow but alive, a silence fell across the main street. Then someone wept. Clara reunited with her father. Others collapsed into arms that hadn't yet forgotten them. The people stared at Kane and Seller like they were specters returned from legend, but neither man lingered. By dusk, they were gone. Kane stood at the edge of a ridge, Seller beside him, the wind lifting dust across the prairie. "You returning east?" Sela asked. Kane shook his head. Nothing left for me there. Then where? Kane looked out over the horizon, where the sun painted fire across the plains. Don't know. West, maybe. South. Wherever I'm needed. Sela grinned faintly. Then we ride. Kane raised a brow. We? I've hunted alone long enough, Kane offered a half smile. You're a strange man, Sela. You're a broken one. They mounted up, the trail behind them still fresh, but the one ahead unknown. As the sun dipped, they rode side by side into the wilderness, two ghosts turned men again, no longer chasing shadows, but shaping what came next. Somewhere behind them, the butcher's bones remained buried, wind-scoured and nameless. The canyon held his secrets, but the women, those who lived, carried something more. They carried hope, and Kane, once consumed by vengeance, rode not for retribution anymore, but for those without voices, without weapons, without riders of their own. He didn't seek peace, only purpose. A trail not stained in blood, but marked in quiet redemption. And somewhere on the wind, a voice, his daughter's voice maybe, or just memory, spoke softly. You came. He nodded to the fading sky. I did. If this story gripped your heart the way Kane held on to his mission, then leave a comment below. What would you have done in his place? Would you ride into the unknown for justice? Don't forget to like the video, share it with fellow lovers of gritty frontier tales, and subscribe for more cinematic journeys into the forgotten corners of history and the human soul. Until next time, keep your fire lit.